The small town of Willow Creek was a place where everyone knew each other. It wasn't the kind of town you'd find on postcards or travel brochures, but it had its own charm. The streets were lined with old oak trees, their branches stretching, wide like arms welcoming visitors. People greeted one another by name at the local grocery store, and life moved at a slow, predictable pace. But lately, that calm rhythm had been shattered. Thomas Harper was the heart of Willow Creek. He wasn't just any man. He was the person everyone turned to when they needed help. Whether it was fixing a leaky roof, giving advice about a troubled teenager, or simply sharing a laugh over coffee, Thomas always seemed to have time for others. His warm smile and steady voice made people feel safe, like no matter what storms life threw their way, everything would be okay as long as he was around. For 16-year-old Emily Harper, her father was more than just a hero to the town. He was her hero. After her mother passed away 5 years earlier, Thomas became both parents to Emily. He worked hard during the day as a carpenter, but always made sure to come home in time for dinner. Even if he was tired, he'd sit with her at the kitchen table, helping her with homework or listening to her talk about her day. On weekends, they'd work together on little projects like painting the fence or planting flowers in the garden. Their favorite project, though, was the treehouse they started building in the backyard. It wasn't finished yet. Life kept getting in the way, but every board nailed into place held a piece of their shared laughter and love. But now, all of that felt like a distant memory. One ordinary Tuesday morning, everything changed. Emily woke up late because she'd forgotten to set her alarm. She rushed downstairs expecting to see her dad already at the stove, flipping pancakes and humming his favorite tune. Instead, the house was eerily quiet. Confused, she called out his name, but there was no answer. Her stomach tightened with unease as she checked every room, her footsteps echoing against the wooden floors. Finally, she found her phone and dialed his number. Before it could even ring twice, the doorbell rang. Startled, Emily opened the door to find Mrs. Peterson, their neighbor, standing there with tears streaming down her face. Behind her stood 2 police officers, their expressions grim. In that moment, Emily's world stopped spinning. Without saying a word, she knew why they were there. Later, she learned the details. Thomas had suffered a sudden heart attack while driving to work. By the time paramedics arrived, it was too late. The news hit Emily like a freight train. How could someone so full of life be gone just like that? It didn't make sense. She sat numbly as relatives and friends gathered around, offering hugs and condolences. But none of it helped. None of it brought him back. In the days that followed, Emily tried to keep herself busy. She cleaned her room, sorted through old photos, and even attempted to finish some of the chores her dad usually handled. But no matter what she did, the emptiness inside her refused to go away. Every corner of the house reminded her of him. The creaky floorboard near the stairs where he used to tap his foot while reading the newspaper, the toolbox in the garage still open from his last project, the half-empty mug of coffee left forgotten on the counter. Her friends tried to cheer her up, inviting her to hang out or watch movies. But Emily couldn't bring herself to leave the house. She felt like she was trapped in a fog, unable to see or hear anything clearly. At night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying memories of her father over and over again in her mind. Sometimes she'd imagine hearing his voice calling her name or catching a glimpse of his shadow walking past her bedroom door. Each time hope flared in her chest, only to be crushed when she realized it was just her imagination playing tricks on her. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Emily wandered into the backyard. The treehouse loomed above her, unfinished and silent. She climbed the ladder slowly, her hands trembling as she grasped the rough wood. Sitting on the edge of the platform, she hugged her knees to her chest and let the tears fall freely. "Why did you leave me?" she whispered into the cool night air. There was no answer, just the soft rustling of leaves overhead. As the days turned into weeks, reality began to sink in. Life in Willow Creek continued moving forward, even though Emily felt stuck in the past. Friends returned to school, neighbors resumed their routines, and the town carried on as if nothing had happened. But for Emily, Nothing would ever be the same again. The man who had been her anchor, her guide, her everything was gone. And now she had to figure out how to navigate this new, unfamiliar world without him. Little did she know. The hardest part was yet to come. The day of the funeral arrived, bringing with it a heavy gray sky that mirrored the somber mood blanketing Willow Creek. The townsfolk gathered at the small church on Maple Street, its white steeple standing tall against the overcast heavens. Inside, rows of wooden pews were filled with familiar faces, friends, neighbors, co-workers, all dressed in dark clothing, their expressions solemn. Soft hymns played in the background, but the music did little to ease the weight pressing down on everyone's hearts. Emily sat in the front row between her Aunt Sarah and her Uncle Mark. Her hands rested limply in her lap, fingers intertwined, so tightly her knuckles turned white. She stared straight ahead at the closed casket draped with flowers, roses, lilies, and daisies arranged carefully by the florist. Each bloom carried a memory. The red roses reminded her of birthdays, the lilies of quiet afternoons spent reading together, and the daisies of summers playing in the backyard. But today, those memories felt distant, almost unreachable, like faded photographs tucked away in an old album. The pastor spoke kindly about Thomas Harper, sharing stories of his kindness, his dedication to his family, and his unwavering commitment to helping others. People nodded along, some wiping tears from their eyes while others exchanged knowing glances. Emily barely heard any of it. Her mind was elsewhere, replaying fragments of conversations she'd had with her father. The sound of his laughter, the way his voice softened when he called her sweetheart, the promises they'd made to each other that would now never come true. When the service ended, the congregation filed out quietly, leaving Emily alone with her immediate family for a private moment with the casket. Aunt Sarah gave her shoulder a gentle squeeze before stepping outside, leaving Emily standing. They're frozen. The room grew quieter, the air heavier, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. For a long moment she didn't move. She couldn't. Her legs felt rooted to the spot, her chest tight with emotion. Finally, taking a shaky step forward, Emily approached the casket. Her reflection stared back at her from the polished wood, pale and fragile. With trembling hands, she reached out and touched the surface. It was cold. Too cold. Nothing like the warmth of her father's embrace. Tears welled up in her eyes, blurring her vision. "Daddy?" she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of her grief. "I miss you so much." Her knees buckled, slightly, and she leaned forward, wrapping her arms around the casket as though trying to hold on to him one last time. As she pressed her cheek against the smooth wood, something strange happened. A faint vibration rippled through the air around her. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, like the hum of electricity running through a wire. Startled, Emily pulled back, her heart pounding. Had she imagined it? Was it just the echo of her own sobs? And then she heard it. A soft chuckle, low and unmistakably familiar. Her breath caught in her throat. Could it be? No, it wasn't possible. Yet deep down she knew that laugh. It was her father's laugh, the same one that used to fill the house during family game nights, the same one that always made her feel safe no matter what. "Dad?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. There was no reply, only silence stretching out endlessly. She glanced around the room, half expecting someone to walk in and explain what had just happened. But she was alone. The realization sent a shiver down her spine. Was she losing her mind? Or was this something else entirely? Reluctantly, she stepped away from the casket, her thoughts swirling like leaves caught in a storm. She wanted to believe it was real, that somehow her father was still with her, even if only for a fleeting moment. But how could that be? Grief played tricks on people, didn't it? Maybe this was just her mind refusing to let go. Outside, the rain began to fall, tapping gently against the stained glass windows of the church. Emily took one last look at the casket before turning toward the door. As she walked down the aisle, she noticed a single ray of sunlight breaking through the clouds, casting a golden glow across the floor. It seemed out of place amidst the gloom, almost magical. For a brief second, she allowed herself to wonder, if magic existed in the world, maybe miracles could too. That night, sleep eluded Emily. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the events of the day over and over again. In her mind, the vibration, the laugh, it all felt so vivid, so real. What if it wasn't her imagination? What if her father really had found a way to reach out to her? The idea was both comforting and terrifying. If it was true, why would he do such a thing? And what did it mean? Unable to stay still, Emily slipped out of bed and padded downstairs. The house was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that seemed to amplify every tiny sound. The ticking of the clock, the creak of the floorboards beneath her feet, the distant rumble of thunder rolling across the sky. She wandered into the living room and curled up on the couch, pulling a blanket tightly around her shoulders. Her gaze drifted to the mantelpiece, where a framed photograph of her and her father sat among other cherished mementos. In the picture, they were standing in front of the treehouse, smiling brightly despite the chaos of construction tools scattered around them. Emily remembered that day clearly. It had been one of the happiest moments of her life. They had promised to finish the treehouse soon, a promise that now hung unfinished like so many other things. As she sat there lost in thought, a gust of wind rattled the windows, startling her. Lightning flashed briefly, illuminating the room in stark relief. And then, just as suddenly as it came, the storm passed, leaving behind an almost unnatural calm. Emily closed her eyes, letting the quiet envelop her. Despite everything, a tiny spark of hope flickered within her. Maybe her father wasn't completely gone. Maybe, just maybe, he was still watching over her in ways she couldn't yet understand. With that thought lingering in her mind, Emily finally drifted off to sleep, her dreams filled with images of her father smiling, laughing, and reaching out to her once more. The days following the funeral were a blur of numbness and routine for Emily. She went through the motions of waking up, eating meals, and attending school. But her heart wasn't in any of it. Her teachers gave her sympathetic smiles and extended deadlines on assignments while her classmates tiptoed around her, unsure of what to say. Some tried to offer comforting words, but their efforts only made Emily feel more isolated. How could they possibly understand what she was going through? No one else had felt that strange vibration or heard that unmistakable laugh at the funeral. No one else knew the questions swirling in her mind. At night, sleep came reluctantly. When it did, her dreams were vivid and unsettling. Flashes of her father's face, fragments of conversations they'd never finished, and shadows that seemed to move just beyond her reach. During the day, she found herself distracted, her thoughts drifting back to that moment in the church. Had it really happened? Was it possible that her father's spirit had somehow reached out to her? The idea felt both impossible and undeniable, like trying to hold water in cupped hands. It slipped away when she tried to grasp it, yet she couldn't deny its presence. One evening, unable to shake the restlessness gnawing at her, Emily decided to take a walk. The air outside was crisp, carrying the faint scent of damp earth from the recent rain. She wandered aimlessly through the quiet streets of Willow Creek, her sneakers crunching softly against the gravel path that led to the edge of town. The stars above twinkled faintly, their light dimmed by the haze of clouds lingering in the sky. It wasn't until she reached the old oak tree in the woods, a place her father used to bring her as a child, that she realized where her feet had been leading her. The tree stood tall and proud, its branches stretching wide like arms embracing the heavens. Beneath it, the ground was carpeted with fallen leaves, their colors muted under the pale moonlight. Emily leaned against the trunk, letting the rough bark press into her back. This spot had always been special to her. It was here that her father had taught her how to skip rocks across the nearby stream, told her stories about constellations, and promised her that no matter what happened in life, this tree would always stand strong, a symbol of resilience. She stood there lost in thought. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves overhead. A gentle warmth brushed against her cheeks, unlike the cool breeze that had accompanied her walk. Startled, Emily turned around, half expecting to see someone standing behind her. Instead, she saw nothing, just the empty expanse of trees swaying gently in the night. "Emily," a voice whispered, soft and familiar. Her breath hitched. That voice, it was unmistakable. Slowly, she scanned the area, her pulse quickening. "Dad?" she called out, her voice trembling. At first, there was no response. Then gradually, a figure began to materialize before her, not fully solid but glowing faintly like sunlight filtering through mist. It was him, her father. His features were slightly blurred, but his smile was as warm and loving as she remembered. Tears sprang to her eyes as she took a hesitant step forward. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice breaking. Thomas Harper raised a hand, as if to stop her from coming closer. "I don't have much time, sweetheart," he said, his tone calm, but urgent. "But I need you to listen carefully." Emily nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She wanted to throw her arms around him, to hold him close and never let go, but something told her this wasn't the time for that. This moment was different. It had purpose. "There's so much more to this world than you know," he continued, his gaze steady. "Things are changing, Emily. Forces beyond our understanding are stirring, and Willow Creek is caught in the middle of it. You're stronger than you think, and you'll need that strength in the days ahead." "What do you mean?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Her mind raced with questions, but she didn't know where to start. What kind of forces? What's happening? Her father hesitated, as though choosing his words carefully. "There's a veil between worlds, a barrier that keeps balance. But it's weakening, and dark things are trying to break through. They'll use fear and doubt to spread chaos. If they succeed, it won't just affect us, it will hurt everyone." Emily shook her head, struggling to comprehend what he was saying. "But why me? Why does this have anything to do with me?" "Because you're my daughter," he replied simply, "and because you carry a light within you that can push back the darkness. I can't stay long, but I'll guide you as best I can. Trust yourself, Emily. Trust the people who care about you. And remember, you're not alone." Before she could respond, his form began to fade, the glow dimming until all that remained was the faint outline of his smile. "Wait," she cried, reaching out instinctively. But the wind carried his voice one last time. "I'm always with you, sweetheart." And then he was gone. For a long moment, Emily stood frozen, her hand still outstretched. The warmth that had surrounded her moments ago vanished, leaving the chill of the night air in its place. Her mind buzzed with confusion and disbelief. Had that really happened? Was she losing her grip on reality? Or was there truth to what her father had said? Slowly, she sank to the ground, hugging her knees to her chest. The enormity of what she'd just experienced pressed down on her like a weight. She wanted to dismiss it as a trick of the mind, a product of grief and exhaustion. But deep down, she knew better. Her father's words had been too real, too deliberate to ignore. Over the next few days, Emily wrestled with what to do. Part of her wanted to tell someone, her Aunt Sarah, her best friend Jake, anyone. But how could she explain something she barely understood herself? Who would believe her? And even if they did, what could they possibly do to help? Instead, she kept it to herself, replaying the encounter over and over in her mind. She began noticing small changes in her surroundings, things she might have overlooked before. Shadows seemed darker, movements sharper. Objects in the house would occasionally shift positions without explanation. A book left open on the wrong page. A chair moved slightly from where she'd last seen it. At first, these incidents unnerved her, but after a while she started to recognize them as signs that her father's warning was true. One afternoon, while cleaning out the attic, Emily stumbled upon an old wooden chest tucked away in a corner beneath a pile of blankets. Curious, she opened it and found a collection of items belonging to her grandmother, a woman she had never met but whose name often came up in family stories. Among the belongings was a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. Intrigued, Emily flipped it open, her eyes scanning the neatly written entries. To her astonishment, the journal detailed accounts of strange occurrences in Willow Creek dating back decades. Her grandmother had documented sightings of ghostly, Figures, unexplained noises, and other phenomena that defied logic. One passage caught Emily's attention. The veil grows thin in times of great sorrow or upheaval. Those sensitive to its shifts may hear whispers or feel tremors in the air. Beware, for such disturbances can attract unwanted attention. Emily's heart raced as she read on. Her grandmother had written about rituals meant to strengthen the veil, protect the living, and ward off malevolent spirits. Sketches of symbols and instructions for ceremonies filled the pages, along with warnings about the dangers of meddling with forces beyond human control. A mixture of fear and determination washed over her. Could this be what her father had been talking about? Was this journal the key to understanding and stopping whatever threat loomed over Willow Creek? As she closed the journal and held it tightly against her chest, Emily realized that her journey was only beginning. Whatever lay ahead, she would face it, not just for herself, but for the memory of her father and the love that continued to guide her. The discovery of her grandmother's journal marked a turning point for Emily. It wasn't just an old book filled with cryptic notes and faded sketches. It was a lifeline, a connection to something bigger than herself. For the first time since her father's passing, she felt like she had a purpose, but that sense of purpose came with a weight she hadn't anticipated. As she pored over the pages late into the night, her mind raced with questions. What exactly was this veil her grandmother wrote about? How could it be weakening? And most importantly, what role was she supposed to play in fixing it? Emily knew one thing for certain. She couldn't do this alone. The journal's warnings were clear. Meddling with forces beyond human understanding was dangerous, especially without guidance. She needed someone she could trust, someone who wouldn't dismiss her as crazy or overwhelmed by grief. That person was Jake. Jake had been Emily's best friend since they were kids. They'd grown up together, sharing everything from scraped knees to secret crushes. He was practical, grounded, and always willing to lend a hand or an ear when she needed it. So when Emily called him over one evening, claiming she needed to talk about something important, he showed up without hesitation. They sat cross-legged. On the floor of Emily's room, the journal spread open between them. At first, Jake listened skeptically as Emily explained what had happened. The strange vibration at the funeral, the vision of her father in the woods, and now the mysterious journal. His brow furrowed, and he shifted uncomfortably, clearly unsure of how to respond. "Okay," he said finally, rubbing the back of his neck. "This is a lot. Are you sure you're not just, I don't know, stressed or something?" Emily sighed, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. She'd expected doubt, but hearing it out loud still stung. "I get it, Jake. This sounds insane, but I'm telling you, it's real. My dad, he came to me. He told me there's something wrong with Willow Creek and we have to fix it." Jake hesitated, his expression softening. He'd known Emily long enough to recognize when she was serious, and right now she looked more determined than ever. "All right," he said slowly. "Let's say you're right. What does this journal say we're supposed to do?" Relieved that he hadn't walked away, Emily flipped through the pages until she found a section detailing the rituals meant to strengthen the veil. It says here that certain symbols need to be drawn at specific locations around town. There's also something about gathering objects of light, whatever that means, and performing a ceremony under the full moon. Jake raised an eyebrow. Symbols, objects of light, full moon ceremonies? This is starting to sound like something out of a movie. "I know," Emily admitted. "But think about it, Jake. Weird stuff has been happening lately. Remember Mrs. Peterson saying she heard voices coming from her attic last week? Or how Mr. Alvarez swore he saw shadows moving on their own outside his store?" Jake frowned, recalling those incidents. They'd been dismissed as coincidences or overactive imaginations, but now, paired with Emily's story, they took on a new significance. "Okay, fine," he said, leaning forward. "Let's say we try this. Where do we start?" Emily smiled, faintly, grateful for his willingness to help. Together they began deciphering the journal's instructions. The first step was identifying the locations where the symbols needed to be drawn. According to the journal, these spots corresponded to places where the veil was thinnest, areas where the boundary between worlds was weakest. Emily recognized some of them immediately: the old oak tree in the woods, the abandoned mill near the edge of town, and even the church where her father's funeral had taken place. Over the next few days, Emily and Jake worked tirelessly to prepare. They spent hours researching the symbols, practicing drawing them until they were perfect. They scoured the house for items that might qualify as objects of light. Her grandmother's journal offered vague descriptions, things like a token of pure intent or something touched by sunlight. Emily settled on a small crystal pendant her mother used to wear, a candle blessed during a family baptism, and a photograph of her and her father smiling together. As they prepared, strange occurrences became more frequent. Doors would creak, open on their own, footsteps echoed in empty hallways, and whispers seemed to follow them wherever they went. One night, while working in her room, Emily felt a sudden chill run down her spine. She turned toward the window and saw a shadowy figure standing just beyond the glass. It didn't move, didn't speak. It simply stared at her with hollow eyes before vanishing into thin air. "Did you see that?" Emily whispered, clutching the edge of her desk. Jake, who had been sketching one of the symbols, looked up sharply. "See what?" "The window. There was something out there." He hurried to the window and peered outside, but the yard was empty. "Are you okay?" he asked, concern etched on his face. Emily nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. "Yeah, just keep going. We don't have much time." Despite the growing unease, they pressed on. Each step brought new challenges, testing their resolve in ways neither of them had anticipated. At school, Emily struggled to focus, her thoughts consumed by the task ahead. Teachers noticed her distracted demeanor and pulled her aside, asking if she needed help coping with her loss. She assured them she was fine, but inside she felt anything but. One afternoon, while visiting the old mill, Emily and Jake encountered their first major obstacle. The journal instructed them to draw the symbol on the floorboards of the dilapidated building's second story. Climbing the rickety staircase, they found themselves surrounded by cobwebs and the musty smell of decay. As Emily knelt to trace the design with chalk, a low rumble shook the structure, sending dust cascading from the ceiling. "What was that?" Jake asked, his voice tinged with alarm. Before Emily could answer, the temperature plummeted, and the air grew thick with an oppressive energy. Shadows twisted and writhed along the walls, forming grotesque shapes that seemed to mock them. A guttural growl reverberated through the space, making the hairs on the back of Emily's neck stand on end. "We need to finish this," Emily shouted, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her insides. With shaking hands, she completed the symbol, pressing the crystal pendant firmly into its center. The growling intensified, and for a moment it felt like the entire mill might collapse. Then, as suddenly as it began, the chaos subsided. The shadows receded, the temperature returned to normal, and the oppressive weight lifted. Breathing heavily, Emily and Jake exchanged wide-eyed glances. "What just happened?" Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I think we pissed something off," Emily replied, her tone grim. But beneath her fear, a spark of determination burned brighter than ever. If they could survive that, they could handle whatever came next. Each location presented its own set of trials. At the church, they were confronted by phantom echoes of past congregants, their mournful cries threatening to overwhelm them. Beneath the old oak tree, roots seemed to twist and writhe, trying to block their path. Yet through it all, Emily held on to her father's words. "You're stronger than you think." Finally, the night of the full moon arrived. Armed with the objects of light and the knowledge gained from the journal, Emily and Jake made their way to the final site, a clearing deep in the woods where the veil was said to be at its thinnest. The air buzzed with electricity, and the stars above twinkled unnaturally bright, casting an otherworldly glow over the landscape. As they began the ceremony, Emily felt a mixture of fear and hope coursing through her veins. This was it, the culmination of everything they'd worked toward. Whether they succeeded or failed, there was no turning back. The clearing in the woods was eerily silent as Emily and Jake prepared for the final ritual. The full moon hung low in the sky, its silvery light spilling across the ground like liquid mercury. Shadows danced at the edges of their vision, shifting unnaturally despite the stillness of the night. Emily clutched the journal tightly in one hand, her fingers trembling slightly as she flipped to the marked page detailing the steps of the ceremony. Beside her, Jake held the objects of light, a small satchel containing the crystal pendant, the blessed candle, and the photograph of Emily with her father. "Are you ready?" Jake asked quietly, his voice barely audible over the rustling leaves. Emily nodded, though her stomach churned with anxiety. "As ready as I'll ever be." They began by arranging the items in a circle on the forest floor, following the instructions outlined in the journal. The crystal pendant was placed at the northernmost point, the candle at the south, and the photograph in the center. Each object seemed to hum faintly, as if imbued with an energy they couldn't quite understand. Emily knelt beside the makeshift altar and took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing heart. The first step of the ritual involved drawing a large pentagram in the dirt using a stick of chalk. According to the journal, the lines had to be precise. Any deviation could weaken the protective barrier they were attempting to create. Emily worked carefully, her hands shaking but determined. As she traced the final line, a sudden gust of wind swept through the clearing, extinguishing the flashlight they'd brought along. Darkness enveloped them, broken only by the pale glow of the moon. "Great," Jake muttered under his breath, fumbling to turn the flashlight back on. It flickered weakly before going out completely. "It's okay," Emily said, forcing calm into her voice. "We don't need it. Just keep going." Next, they lit the blessed candle using a matchbook Jake had stuffed into his pocket earlier. The flame wavered precariously in the breeze but remained alight, casting long, distorted shadows across the trees. Emily held the journal open with one hand, while reciting the incantation written within. Her voice was soft at first, hesitant, but as the words flowed, it grew stronger, more confident. As she spoke, the air around them shifted. A low hum filled the clearing, vibrating through the ground beneath their feet. The hairs on the back of Emily's neck stood on end, and she glanced at Jake, who looked equally unsettled. "You feel that too, right?" he whispered, gripping the edge of his jacket. She nodded. "It's working. Keep holding the candle." But just as Emily reached the midpoint of the incantation, a chilling scream tore through the night. It wasn't human. It was guttural, raw, and filled with rage. Both Emily and Jake froze, their eyes darting toward the source of the sound. From the shadows emerged dark, amorphous figures, their forms constantly shifting and writhing like smoke caught in a storm. They moved closer, encircling the clearing, their presence suffocating. "What are those things?" Jake stammered, backing away instinctively. "I don't know," Emily replied, her voice trembling. "But we can't stop now. We have to finish." Summoning every ounce of courage, Emily continued chanting, her voice rising above the cacophony of whispers and growls emanating from the shadowy figures. Jake, clutching the candle tightly, stepped closer to her, shielding the flame from the swirling winds that threatened to snuff it out. The entities responded with fury, lashing out with tendrils of darkness that clawed at the edges of the protective circle. One tendril struck the ground mere inches from Emily's foot, leaving behind a scorched mark. She flinched but refused to break her focus. The journal had warned that malevolent forces would try to disrupt the ritual, but it also emphasized the importance of completing it no matter what. "Stay inside the circle," Emily shouted to Jake, her tone urgent. "Don't let them touch you." Jake nodded, his knuckles white as he gripped the candle. "Got it. Keep going." With each word of the incantation, the figures grew more agitated, thrashing wildly in an attempt to breach the barrier. Their screams pierced the air, deafening and relentless. Emily felt tears streaming down her face, not from fear but from sheer exhaustion. Her throat burned and her legs ached from kneeling for so long, but she pressed on, driven by the memory of her father's voice echoing in her mind. "You're stronger than you think." Finally, she reached the last line of the incantation. Taking a deep breath, She raised her voice, letting the words ring out loud and clear. "By the power of light and love, I seal this veil and banish the darkness." At that exact moment, the objects of light began to glow. A soft, golden radiance emanating from the crystal pendant, the candle, and even the photograph. The light spread outward, forming a dome that engulfed the entire clearing. The shadowy figures recoiled, screeching in agony as the brilliance consumed them. For a brief second, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a deafening roar, the light exploded outward, sending shockwaves rippling through the forest. Emily and Jake shielded their eyes, blinded by the intensity of the glow. When the brightness faded, the clearing was silent once more. The oppressive weight in the air had vanished, replaced by a sense of peace that settled over them like a warm blanket. For several moments, neither of them spoke. They simply sat there, catching their breath and processing what had just happened. The shadowy figures were gone. The unnatural hum in the air had ceased, and the stars above twinkled innocently, as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. "That was insane," Jake finally managed to say, his voice hoarse. Emily nodded, her body trembling with a mix of relief and disbelief. Do you think it worked?" Before Jake could respond, a gentle breeze swept through the clearing, carrying with it the faint scent of pine and earth. And then, as if carried on the wind itself, a familiar voice spoke softly. "You did it, sweetheart." Emily's eyes widened, and she turned toward the sound. Though no figure appeared, she knew without a doubt who it was. "Dad, I'm proud of you," the voice continued, filled with warmth and love. "You've restored balance, now it's time to let me go." Tears streamed down Emily's face as she whispered, "I love you, Daddy." "And I love you," the voice replied. "Always." And just like that, the presence was gone, leaving behind only the peaceful stillness of the forest. Emily collapsed onto the ground, overwhelmed by emotion. Jake placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, offering silent support. When they finally gathered their belongings and made their way back home, the town of Willow Creek seemed different. Brighter, quieter, more at ease. Over the following days, reports of strange occurrences dwindled until they disappeared altogether. Life returned to normal, or as close to normal as it could be after such an experience. Though Emily missed her father deeply, she found solace in knowing that he was at peace. The lessons he'd taught her, about strength, resilience, and the enduring power of love, would stay with her forever. And as she looked up at the stars each night, she couldn't help but smile, feeling his presence in the quiet rustle of leaves and the warmth of the moonlight. The days that followed the ritual in the woods were unlike any Emily had experienced before. Willow Creek seemed to breathe easier, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from its shoulders. The once oppressive atmosphere was replaced by a sense of calm and renewal. Neighbors greeted each other with genuine smiles, children laughed freely in the streets, and even the old oak tree in the woods appeared more vibrant, its leaves shimmering under the morning sun. For Emily, life began to take on a new rhythm. She still missed her father deeply, but the ache in her heart felt different now, less suffocating, more bittersweet. It wasn't just the absence of strange occurrences or shadowy figures that brought her peace. It was the knowledge that she had done something meaningful, something that honored her father's memory and protected the town he loved so much. Jake became an even closer friend after their shared ordeal. He didn't talk about what happened often, neither of them did, but there was an unspoken understanding between them. They both knew they had faced something extraordinary together, something that would bind them forever. Whenever Emily needed someone to listen, Jake was there, offering quiet support without judgment. And when Jake struggled with doubts or fears of his own, Emily reminded him of the strength they'd discovered during those harrowing nights in the woods. One evening, as autumn painted the trees in hues of gold and crimson, Emily decided to revisit the clearing where the final ritual had taken place. She hadn't been back since that fateful night, partly out of fear and partly because she wasn't sure how she'd feel returning to such a powerful place. But now, with the air crisp and the world bathed in soft twilight, She felt drawn to it. Walking through the woods, she noticed subtle changes. The path seemed clearer, less overgrown than she remembered. Sunlight filtered through the canopy above, creating dappled patterns on the forest floor. When she reached the clearing, she stopped short, her breath catching in her throat. Where chaos and darkness had once reigned, there was now tranquility. Wildflowers bloomed in clusters around the edges, their colors vivid against the earthy tones of fallen leaves. Even the ground where she and Jake had drawn the pentagram looked untouched, as though nature itself had healed the scars left behind. Emily knelt down, running her fingers lightly over the soil. She closed her eyes and let the silence envelop her. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to truly grieve, not just for her father, but for everything she had lost and gained along the way. Tears slipped silently down her cheeks, but they weren't tears of sadness alone. There was gratitude in them too, for the love her father had given her, for the courage she'd found within herself, and for the friendships that had carried her through. As she sat there, a gentle breeze stirred the air, carrying with it the faint scent of pine. A whisper, barely audible, brushed past her ear. "You've grown so much, sweetheart." Her eyes snapped open, searching for the source of the voice. Though no one was visible, she smiled softly, recognizing the familiar warmth behind the words. "Thank you," she murmured, knowing he couldn't hear her but feeling compelled to say it anyway. "For everything." When she returned home that night, Emily found Aunt Sarah waiting for her in the living room. Her aunt had been a constant source of comfort throughout these difficult months, always ready with a kind word or a warm hug. Tonight, however, there was a seriousness in her expression that caught Emily off guard. "Can we talk?" Aunt Sarah asked gently, patting the seat beside her on the couch. Emily hesitated for a moment before sitting down. "What is it?" Aunt Sarah took a deep breath, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I know this has been hard for you, losing your dad like that, and I want you to know that I'm here for you no matter what. But I also think it's important for you to start thinking about moving forward, not forgetting him, that's impossible, but finding ways to live your life fully again." Emily nodded slowly, understanding what her aunt was trying to say. "I get it. I really do. And I think I'm starting to figure that out." She told Aunt Sarah about her trip to the clearing, leaving out the supernatural details, but sharing how peaceful it had felt, how she'd finally allowed herself to cry, not out of pain but out of gratitude. By the time she finished speaking, Aunt Sarah's eyes were shining with pride. "You're stronger than anyone realizes," Aunt Sarah said, pulling Emily into a tight embrace. "Your dad would be so proud of you." Over the next few weeks, Emily threw herself into finishing projects she and her father had started together. The treehouse in the backyard, which had stood half-built for years, became her primary focus. With Jake's help, she nailed boards into place, sanded rough edges, and painted the structure a cheerful shade of blue. Every hammer strike and brush stroke felt like a tribute to her father, a way of keeping his spirit alive in the little things. When the treehouse was finally complete, Emily climbed inside and sat on the wooden bench they'd built along one wall. From this vantage point, she could see the entire yard, the garden her father used to tend, the swing set she'd played on as a child, and the oak tree where they'd spent countless afternoons laughing and talking. It was as if all the pieces of her life were coming together, forming a mosaic of memories she could carry with her wherever she went. School resumed its usual pace, and Emily found herself reconnecting with classmates she hadn't spoken to in months. People noticed a change in her, not just the confidence she exuded, but the kindness she extended to others. Whether it was helping a struggling student with math homework or simply listening to a friend vent about a bad day, Emily approached every interaction with empathy and understanding. She realized that her journey had taught her not only how to face challenges, but also how to uplift those around her. One chilly December morning, as snow blanketed Willow Creek in a pristine layer of white, Emily woke up early and ventured outside. The world was quiet, muffled by the fresh snowfall. She walked to the cemetery, her boots crunching softly against the frozen ground. At her father's grave, she placed a single red rose and knelt down, brushing away the thin layer of frost. covering the headstone. "Hey, Dad," she said softly, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. "I just wanted to tell you that I'm okay. Really okay. I miss you every day, but I'm learning how to keep going. You taught me how to be strong, and I hope I'm making you proud." As she spoke, a ray of sunlight broke through the gray clouds, casting a golden glow over the cemetery. Emily smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the weather. She stayed there for a while longer, letting the silence surround her, before standing up and heading back home. Life moved forward as it always does. Emily graduated high school at the top of her class, gave a heartfelt speech at the ceremony about resilience and love, and prepared to leave Willow Creek for college. Leaving the town, and the memories it held, was bittersweet, but she knew her father would have encouraged her to chase her dreams. On her last night in Willow Creek, she visited the old oak tree one final time. Sitting beneath its branches, she pulled out a small notebook and began writing, a story inspired by everything she had been through. She wrote about loss and grief, about courage and friendship, and about the enduring power of love that transcends even death itself. As the words flowed onto the page, she realized that her journey wasn't just hers alone. It was a story worth sharing with the world, and as she closed the notebook and gazed up at the star-filled sky, she whispered one last promise to her, "Father, I'll never stop remembering you, but I'll also never stop living, for both of us." With that, Emily Harper stepped into the next chapter of her life, carrying her father's legacy in her heart and his lessons guiding her every step of the way.